Howdy, howdy. Sudevil here, and welcome to our next installment of our Improving Total Warhammer series. And in this installment, I really want to talk about diplomacy. It is something that has really been discussed through all the Total War games, and periodically discussed through a lot of the Let's Plays I've seen as sometimes not making sense, or some people say it's outright broken, which I certainly don't believe. I think for the most part it's fairly intuitive, and but it could use a lot of improvement, and all the improvements that are made to the diplomacy part of this game could serve to make the game a lot deeper, a lot more meaningful, and make a lot more sense, and have a lot less frustration as a player. Now, the first thing I would like to go through is just some simple things that could be done to reduce the mental overhead when it comes to diplomacy. And what I mean by that is you can have this system be as complex as it is, or even more complex, but you can also at the same time reduce the mental overhead by just giving a couple of tick boxes on the right side here. One would be at the end of all of these. One would be to ignore diplomacy or offers from. You could click them all, so you would ignore any offers from any other races. Done, done, and done. If this is not your part of gameplay you care about, you just simply click that box for all of them, and no one will ever again ask for any kind of agreement from you. Very simple. It's very much in line with the things they've done with the end turn button and the in-between turn things. And the second one is I would like a button that basically notify if any elements of your diplomacy have changed. So say for example you're waiting for Karak Kadrin to be ready to take a confederation, and all you want to know is, has this changed from red to yellow or yellow to green? And that's it. That way you don't have to come in here and check it every turn. I mean, this is one of the things I do in my own campaigns, is I'm constantly checking this, because sometimes it will change for a turn or two and then go from yellow to green and then back to red, and you've missed your chance. So I think that would really take a lot of the mental overhead out of managing your diplomacy. You can choose to ignore everyone who you don't want to be constantly hitting you with military alliance offers or peace treaties or this types of things. And you could also have a notification button that would tell you if something has changed with a faction you're interested in advancing your diplomacy with. Very, very simple, and maybe even a further button to see if, well, I mean, I don't know if you need a third one, but something that I would personally like, but it might be too much, is to see if Karak Hearn's relations have changed with anyone else, to see notifications of that. I don't think that's required. It's something that I like to do because, I like to go and look at a faction, and I like to understand, okay, if I'm looking at Wurzag, what are his relationships like with some other faction? And you can look and see when it comes to the Bloody Hands, his relationship is deteriorating. So I would like that to actually be able to mouse over a town, or make it a little bit easier for those of us who really want to see, okay, how does faction A feel about faction B, which is not us, and how does faction B feel about faction A, and eventually I'd like some way of influencing that a little more deeply if I could. Not precisely like what the High Elves have, but more of a some kind of mechanic. Something that can be completely ignored if this is not your thing, but would allow for a much deeper element of gameplay for those of us who really do enjoy this type of gameplay. Now, I think the other things that, when it comes to diplomacy, that I'd like to see is I would like to see diplomacy in general be a little bit more deterministic. I know there's elements of randomness in it, and I'd like those elements of randomness to stay, obviously, because it changes campaign from one to the next. That's why all your campaigns are very different and all your playthroughs are unique, which is a good element. But for example, in the last campaign I played, I had the High Elves declare war on me for no apparent reason. They were friendly with me. When they did it, they were across the map. They never sent an army. We weren't even close to being able to fight each other, and it just didn't make any sense. So something that could be done, I think, and in a lore-friendly way, and in a way that would make sense, is let's assume that that happens again. One, I'd like to see, I'd like to have the ability to see changing relations, obviously, or changing attitudes towards my faction. You know, something you can turn off or turn on completely, so you get a little warning or a little bit of heads up that some bad thing is coming or something is changing in a meaningful way. But you could have in-game a situation where you know, the High Elves, you know, were somehow infiltrated by the Dark Elves, and they've manipulated them to want to start a war with you. Now, again, same situation. Is the in-game, the High Elves declare war on the dwarfs from across the map for whatever, but in one situation there is no apparent reason, it doesn't make sense, and you say to yourself, well, this is stupid. And the next is, okay, well, that does make sense. This is not the first time Dark Elves have infiltrated High Elf leadership and caused some sort of problem within there. Not that it would make the net gameplay any different per se. It would just make it make more sense, and that's something I think that could be done relatively easily with not a lot of overhead, and you really could enhance the gameplay. You know, you might think, well, that's BS, but you know, Dark Elves are really good at infiltrating, and they've done that to the High Elves for millennia, so that would make some sort of sense. I guess what I'm asking for is, in the diplomacy part of the game, to, even though there is a certain amount of randomness in it, I would like it to be a little bit more deterministic. That said, I would also like to have little blurbs here and there explaining why a faction is doing what it's doing. The other thing I would like to see, and again, this is something that would be very easy to implement, is you go to this screen, let's say I look at Greybeard's Prospectors, and you know, we're friendly but deteriorating. I see the treaties with the Greybeard's Prospectors are giving me plus 18, the Confederation penalty with dwarfs minus 40, great power minus 5. What I would like to see on top of here is the current most beneficial thing I could do to improve the relationship with them, and the current most damning thing I could do to damage our relationship. So just on the bottom, right before it goes to right after total attitude, you could have, you know, right now we have a chance to get a military access or defensive alliance, and that's probably defensive alliance is the best thing we could possibly do right now. But you could just say the most beneficial diplomatic course to take to improve relations with the Greybeard's Prospectors would be to get a defensive alliance, and the most damning thing you could do is to make a non-aggression pact with the Knights of the Flame. Something simple like that. You know, it doesn't really have to be much, but it is something that you could really change your understanding of the game. It would be like having a diplomatic advisor, and just extending this in a way that should be relatively easy to implement, doesn't have a lot of overhead, and it's something you never have to look at if you don't care about it, but it could add more strategic depth to the game. The other thing I would love to see in terms of adding a little tidbit to make the game more understandable while not changing the game a lot is, let's say we wanted to go and attack Ackendorf. Declare war, making this attack is an act of war. Do you wish to proceed? When you're doing anything, it'd be nice to have a little diplomacy mouse over, so that I could just mouse over that. A little screen would come up like the last one, and it would say, basically, have the consequences of this act. By doing this, you will improve your relations with faction XYZ by +4, +2, +1, or +10, and you'll hurt your relations with these factions, M, N, and O, by this amount. So you have a really clear understanding of what the consequences of your actions are, and you could do that for everything. Like if you're attacking the Scabby Eyes, you could have that for everyone. Just have a little mouse over, simple like that you never ever have to access if you don't care about it. And when you do it, you may be able to think twice about doing it. And you could do the same with when you take over a settlement. By if you sack it, if you raise it, if you occupy it, does that have any diplomatic consequences for any of these actions, and what are they specifically? Same with at the end of the end of a battle, where you can execute, release, or do whatever with the captives. What will that do? Will it give you, if you release greenskin captives, I know that it hurts your relations with other dwarves. But to have a little button to say, okay, you can see all the dwarf factions are negatively affected by this element by -2, or if you execute them, it is all positive for these ones, it's negative for these ones, etc., etc. It would be a simple enough thing to put in there, a little mouse over that you really can utterly ignore if this is not your type of gameplay, but it would make a lot more sense as a player if you wanted to get a deeper understanding of the consequences of your military actions throughout the game. And you could do the same with your heroes before they take an action on a settlement or another hero or whatever. It'd be quite simple to do so, but would add a lot of impact. Like you go and you want to make a defensive alliance with them. Again, have a little mouse over. This will affect your relationship with them, but will it positively affect anyone else? Will it negatively affect anyone else? Like a little mouse over button that just pulls up a screen just like this when I mouse over here, with just a list of the impacts of your diplomatic decision. Simple to do, very impactful in the gameplay element if that's your type of gameplay. Now, the last thing I would like to see is either the addition of a hero or the addition of a set of skills within a given hero. I think the addition of a hero would be more effective, and that would be the addition of a diplomat. That's something that would be very easy to implement as the addition of a hero, and maybe you start with one diplomat and you can get a maximum of 3, and in general, like, you have to have a building built or something like that, but you could give your diplomats twice as much movement speed or a certain amount of movement speed. And the function of the diplomat would be twofold. If you didn't care about diplomacy and you just wanted to stick them in an army, you could give them their own skill tree, and though they would not be necessarily as good as another hero in combat, maybe they buff your army or your leadership, or they're really a leadership focused hero where they can buff this or that to give a little bit different element of gameplay within an army. So basically, if that's something you don't care about, you just stick them in your army and you can use them as you like. But if it is something you do care about, what this diplomat could do is simply, when you sit your diplomat, let's say I wanted better relations with the border princes, you take your diplomat and you just sit him in that province, and he has a passive where It just improves diplomacy each turn and over time, and you can level that ability with you and the border princes. Very simple. Be nice, you get vision into what's going on in Ackendorf, but it allows you to focus some of your gameplay towards actively altering diplomacy within the structure of the game itself. And I think that would be really a great and simple element to add to the game. Something, again, that is completely ignorable. If you just want another hero in your army that's going to be pretty decent and has a specific set of skills that are different from other heroes, you pop them in your army. You know, you can give them some armor and they will do their thing. Otherwise, you can deploy them in other parts of the world, or you can just use them for scouting, whatever you want. And eventually it might actually, I've been thinking about assassinations and stuff like this in the game. It's not an element of gameplay that I really like, but it may give that element of gameplay a little bit more of a boost, because let's say you're wanting an agreement with Ackendorf, and it turns out that the vampires want an agreement with Ackendorf, and they have a diplomat here in Ackendorf, and you put a diplomat. You can then send a Thane there to try and assassinate that diplomat or chase them off somehow. Might add a little more elements to the gameplay, and you can see where the AI is focusing its efforts on increasing its own diplomacy. Something very simple. It would be a little bit of an interesting part of gameplay that you see, well, wait a minute, there is an Empire diplomat here, and there is also a diplomat from Kislev, and you notice the Empire and Kislev don't like each other, so obviously they are both trying to ally with this one faction. You could actually impact that if you really wanted to by sending one of your Thanes to try and assassinate the diplomat you didn't like. Whatever. It really is I think a fairly easy to implement within the current game structure. It's fairly easy to implement in terms of adding another hero and a few extra mechanics that are already pretty straightforward, and away you go. There's other elements of diplomacy I think that other people have talked about. The big things for me, I think, are, again, making it simple, giving yourself two buttons, giving an ignore button, so you can just ignore any offers from anyone you don't want to hear from, and a notification button to say something has changed with this faction in terms of how they feel about you. And maybe they've gone from yellow to green, or red to green, or yellow to red, or there is something almost like the imminent rebellion notification, where you have that notification where it is something bad is on the way with a faction like the Empire. Maybe they're going to end their trade agreement with you in a turn or two. You get a little bit of advanced notification that is the path that the AI is on, and it would really make the game more fun. And you could say, well, maybe it's exploitable. I don't know. I think in this game specifically, more so than any other Total War game, you really are the hero of the game. It is really intended to allow the player to be the hero, to manipulate the world the way they see fit, and to get enjoyment out of that part of gameplay however they would like to experience it. So pretty simple in general. A couple extra buttons just to reduce the mental overhead. You don't get so many. You can turn it off completely if you don't want to think about it at all. Very simple. You can add notifications just for a faction or two that you're really focused on and that you care about. Or you could have it on none. Maybe the default is off so that you don't... I actually think the default should be... Well, it's hard to say how you set it up, because you want to make it so new players aren't overwhelmed when they first start playing. Maybe they get to the point and they look and they'll just see those buttons and they could be default off or default on, and they say, oh, I do want to get notifications if Kara Kadrin has changed the nature of their relationship with me, because I'm really looking for a confederation with them. So and beyond that, the simple addition of a hero that has been in many games before. The diplomat is very, very common in Total War games, and the mechanics are very, very easy to implement because all the structure is there. And I don't think it would, because it's really intuitive as to what a diplomat does. You have your diplomat, mouse over them and say, send them to the capital. If they're sitting in a capital, they will increase your diplomatic relations with that faction. Really simple. Maybe I want to confederate with Zufbar next. I just take my diplomat and I send him right to Zufbar, and I just sit him there until I'm confederated. And once I've done that, maybe I want to end the war with the von Karsteins. I send them to their capital, and it allows me to get closer to ending a war with them, so I can focus on a war somewhere else. Whatever it is, very simple. And I may have another video on diplomacy later on, but I think with these simple changes, and a little bit of a change to the AI, mind you, in that, like I said, I do believe it needs to be a little more deterministic so that it makes more sense to the player what's occurring around them, without removing any of the elements of randomness. The only thing I would like to see is, if there is an element of randomness thrown in, it is an obvious event. You look, and if you have your notifications turned on for the Empire, and the Empire gets a random event where, say, they're somehow Karl Franz has had someone whispering in his ear that the dwarves are about to betray them, so now the relations between the Empire and the dwarves are going to go downhill fast. You get a little notification, if you have that clicked on, that something has changed and an event has taken place, so that you have some amount of time to try and combat that change. So that's basically it for me. I hopefully we have a lot of comments in this. I know that diplomacy in general is a very hot topic, because people have very strong feelings as to diplomacy in general. Some people feeling it's outright broken, some people feeling it is a very weak part of the game. I've played the game enough, and I understand diplomacy enough that really it's not that bad. In general, it does make a lot of sense, but you still get weird things happening. I'm not saying that you don't, but you shouldn't have to play the game as long as I have to have an understanding of how diplomacy functions. And I think that is something that could be handled very easily with a couple extra tick box buttons, a one new hero or a new hero line. So maybe you put that line in your runesmith or something like that, which I wouldn't like to see. I like the heroes we have where they are, so I'd like to see a definite a very clear diplomat on the screen, and of course a little mouse over, so that when you do anything, there's a little mouse over that tells you what are going to be the consequences of your actions. And it's something, again, you never have to think about. You may mouse over it by accident once in a while, but you don't even have to look at it. If this is not your thing, it doesn't change the way you play. You just play how you're going to play, and you don't worry about it. If it is your thing, it is invaluable information, and it may change your decisions, or at the very least make you understand the AI's diplomatic decisions based on your actions in a more meaningful way. So that's it for the video. I would love to hear people's comments and thoughts on diplomacy, and particularly suggestions on how to improve diplomacy. I've played other games. I've played a game called Diplomacy, and I know there are good games that are really good at this. And this is something that I think without a lot of development time could be improved pretty dramatically within the Total War Warhammer specifically and the greater Total War series. I mean, I know there's the new Rome 2 diplomacy. I'm not sure how that works. I haven't played it, but yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts on possible improvements. If not a specific improvement, what you would like to experience as a player when you're interacting with the diplomacy mechanism in game, and maybe other games where you thought the diplomacy was fantastic as a reference point. And something that, if I see a game I've never seen before in there where the diplomacy is very good, I will eat that up, go onto YouTube and find some let's plays or things like that to watch up. Or if you have a good example, put a YouTube link in the comments. I would love to see it. So I hope there's lots of comments and lots of discussion on diplomacy, and at the very least I hope you found this interesting, and I will see you soon.